Gotta kiss the Admiral. Good evening. My name is Mack Brewster, and I am an alcoholic. And I'm very glad to be here tonight, and especially glad to see Ann. And she called me and gave me some final directions this last week, and I got lost. I ended up over here in the cabin. Well, this guy with 9 years here, he ended up, we were almost got taken into the church over there. But finally, we got a little priest that directed us over here. So I'm very glad to be here. I've been up before to the other church. Like I say, I get a call from Ann, and it's always special because I did get sober in a Waterfront meeting in Union Hall over in Wilmington, California. I don't know if you know where Wilmington is or not, but it's a little resort area on the way to Catalina. And I went to a meeting, helped take a meeting to a guy in the hospital here recently, and there was 5 of us. And somebody called me and they said, Miss George had been in the hospital for a couple of weeks. He hasn't had a meeting, so just take him up a meeting at noon tomorrow. So there's 5 or 6 of us showed up there. We got into the room with George and closed the door, and we got out a big book, and we're having a meeting. And this guy's reading the 5th chapter, and all of a sudden there's a knock on the door. And this little intern stuck his head in, and he said, I thought I was going crazy. He says, I got about 90 days sobriety. And he said, I'm going down the hall and I hear the 5th chapter being read. So we invite him into the meeting. And he said something, I just to show you, this guy's had 90 days, but he'd been listening. Now, I had heard this since I came in the program. It said Alcoholics Anonymous will not solve all your problems, but it'll let you live with unsolved problems. And this young man added something to it. He said it'll let you live with unsolved problems in a quiet heart. I never heard that, and I thought, God, that was really good. This afternoon, as I came up from Santa Barbara, I stopped out here on the coast and parked out by myself, and I just watched that sunset. And we don't see too many of them out. I live in Covina out in the San Gabriel Valley. By the time we get all that smog from LA out there, we really don't get to see that many sunsets. That was beautiful. And I think for a few minutes out there, and still do, have a quiet heart. It's a direct result of this program. These steps, I'm usually looking to my right because they're on my right. These steps in loving God that I found here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I belong to a home group out in Covina where I live. We have a clubhouse out there called the 502 Club. It has nothing to do with drinking and driving. It just happens that our clubhouse is located at 502 2nd Street. And they have a big banner on the wall up there, and it says Sobriety Capital of the World. And it got a big whirl and an arrow pointing on this big banner, and it's been there for years. The old-timers in our group, they catch the newcomers, and they actually convince them that that is the sobriety capital of the world. And I don't know anything about it, but I know that it's nice to speak here at the second best group in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd like to tell you about some of our old-timers I see. And here, she's a gift to your group. She really is. I know she is. I feel it. I felt it when I talked to her the other day. I felt it when I came in this room tonight. And we have some old-timers out in our group, too. We have a little lady out there named Camille. She's been sober 30-some-odd years. And just as mean as the devil. And I went into a meeting one day, and she was sitting there. I hadn't seen her in quite a while. I got her a cup of coffee, and I said, Camille, how are things going? Where have you been? And she says, Mack, I've been out 14th stepping. I said, 14 stepping, and she says, yeah, when you get too old at 13 step, they let you watch. Newcomers are probably looking around saying, what's funny, but you'll find out. Just stick around. And I was down in San Pedro not too long ago, and I ran to another one that used to be in our group. And he's an Irishman, and I noticed he's still got the St. Patty's stuff up here on the wall. But this guy's Joe Neer is his name. But a few years ago, he's 30-some-odd years sober, Joe went blind. And I spoke at this Waterfront meeting, and they called on him to be a 10-minute speaker. He came up, and he put his little cane on the podium, and he said, I want to tell you a story about a blind man. He said this blind man's going down the street with his seeing-eye dog, and the dog walked him right into a telephone pole, knocked him down, broke his nose bleeding, he's laying on the ground. And a guy ran across the street and helped the blind guy up, and got him up on his feet, and the guy reaches in his pocket and he pulls out a cookie, and he starts calling the dog. And the guy says, my God, I can't believe this. He says, I saw what happened. The dog walked you right into the telephone pole. Now you're going to give him a cookie. He says, no, I'm just trying to find out where his head is so I can kick his ass. So everything isn't always like it seems around here, you know. Even if you see it, you know, it isn't. But I was brought to Alcoholics Anonymous. Somebody brought me my first meeting on June 15th, 1966. Through the grace of a loving God that I found here, and people like this and people like this that were in the room when I came, I found it necessary to drink any alcohol, go to jail, live the way I used to live. For that I'm very grateful. I came up here tonight not because I got asked to or because I had to. I came up here because I get to come up here. I really do. I get to come up here. You know, and I have only about 3 things that I share when I get a chance to share. And one of the things I'll share here today will probably be about 14 years of my life that I didn't have any type of chemical or drugs or anything to put into my system to take away any of the feelings and the pain and the stuff that went on inside of me. And then I'll share about 22 years of using and abusing alcohol, to the point that I believe that I became addicted to alcohol and became an alcoholic. And then I'll share with you about 26 years and a few months and a few days, one day at a time here, sober in a program called Alcoholics Anonymous. So that's what I have to share here. I'd like to tell you about the last drink I had. What I hope is the last drink I'll ever have. It was in a flop house on Anaheim Street in Wilmington, California. And it was probably about 10 o'clock in the morning or something like that, and somebody beat on the door, and I came to and let them in. And it was a 16-year-old daughter of mine. I don't remember everything that went on in that room, and the things that did go on, I saw them probably a little different than the way my daughter saw them that day. That 16-year-old girl was my daughter, and she was all over my case about what a lousy father I was, and why I wasn't working, and why I wasn't taking care of business, and why I either drunk all the time. She was asking all the questions. I had none of the answers, except that I poured a water glass full of whiskey, and I tried to get it down. I'd get it in my mouth, and I couldn't swallow it. I'd have to spit it back in the glass. And that's what went on in that room for a few minutes. And before she left, she said, it's a nice sunny day. You're cooped up in here drunk. So why don't you go out and sit beside the building? There's some chairs out there, sun shining, and see what you're doing. Everybody that loves you and cares about you. She left. And I don't know if it was an hour later, 2 hours, or what, because I don't even know if I had a watch. I doubt if I did at that point, but I know I still had the same drink, and I couldn't get it down. and I'm sitting out beside this building, and I'm getting in my mouth, and I couldn't swallow it. And I've been mixing up Benzedrine with alcohol, and when I'd come down off of that stuff, it was terrifying. And that day, I just couldn't get any more alcohol into my system. And a guy came by, and he pulled up a chair that was sitting there next to me. This guy had his shirt off, and it was a nice hot day. The guy had two big eagles tattooed on his chest. And he had a coffee cup in his hand. And he pulled up a chair, and he sat down, and he talked to me about that drink that I had in my hand. I don't remember Danny talking to me about me. He just told me, he said, I used to try to get them down, Mack, the way you're trying to get that one down today. He said, I used to shake and be as sick as you are here. And he says, I don't live that way anymore. And he talked to me for a few minutes, and again, I don't remember everything that was said, but I've talked to him about what happened that day since. And he told me, he said, if you'll go back in your room and shake it out, don't drink anything more today. He says, tomorrow I'll come and get you, and I'll take you to a place where you never have to have another drink as long as you live, if you don't want it. But he didn't mention Alcoholics Anonymous. But you know, something happened, and for a long time I didn't know why. I used to tell people I didn't know really why I believed Danny that day. But I think I know today. I think in that big book here talks about the language of the heart, one drunk talking to another. And that's what took place out there beside that building with me a little over 26 years ago. One drunk talking to another. And I've come to believe that that it is the language of the heart, but most drunks listen with their head, you know. And I think for a few minutes out there beside that building that day, booze had beat me to the point that I became willing to listen with my heart because he was talking. And maybe that's what happened to me, because I've been on a lot of drunks just like that. I'd come down a lot of times before when it was just as hard. I don't know why that day was any different, except the man was there. Somewhere in that book it says, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. I think it says that basically in another book too that they read. But I think the teacher appeared that day, and I believed him. I went back in the room in that flop house on Anaheim Street where I was staying, and I don't remember that day too much, but the next afternoon I remember, because all hell broke loose up there in that room. I came down, and that booze was, I couldn't drink the booze, and I'm up there, and I'm waiting for this guy. And something moved in that room in the afternoon, and it was fear. Fear covered that room up there with me. If there's anything I can remember, it was the fear of me up there in that room and not drinking and thinking, what am I going to do if that guy don't show up? What am I going to do if he don't show up? That was my feeling. It was getting dark, and he hadn't showed up. I remember I'd go to the window and look out, and it was getting dark, and finally there was a knock on the door. I opened the door, and the guy was there, and I went with him. We walked down Anaheim Street, Wilmington, and turned on a little street called Broad Street, and we went down to a Union Hall. And we sat down in the back of a Union Hall. And there was 10 people sitting at a table in the back of this Union Hall. Now, I've heard people say that they've been in AA for a long time. Never met anybody they drank with. Not true with me. I knew everybody in the room. I knew everybody in that room. I'd either been to sea with them, drank with them, longshored with them, been in jail, fought with them, something. I knew everybody there. There was a drunken seaman in that meeting that night. His name was Scotty, and I'd been on a ship with Scotty when I was 16 years old. I grew up in Wilmington. I ran away from home when I was 16 and went up to San Francisco in the middle of that popular war. And I got some papers, and I started going to sea when I was 16. I'd been on a ship down the South Pacific with this Scotty guy, and I'd seen him drunk before, and he was drunk in this meeting. And I remember that he wanted to read out of the book like they had, and they let him read out of the book, and he cried all the way through. He was one of these crying drunks. And he was reading this book and crying. And I don't remember what he read, but I know it must have been chapter 5. It's what they read there. And if anything impressed me about it was that they didn't throw him out, you know. But I remember in that meeting they asked if there's any newcomers, which we asked here today, anybody here, and I didn't raise my hand. I didn't raise my hand because I don't want to be an alcoholic. almost 27 years ago, the word alcoholic, or you call a guy an alcoholic, those fighting words. Huh? It's a lot different today. You can't turn a TV on or a radio on for 10 minutes that somebody isn't talking about alcohol, addiction, drug, 12-step programs or something. It wasn't that way 27 years ago. I had a mother-in-law once that used to call me an alcoholic. She called me a communist too, you know, so really didn't make any difference about her, you know. And but I didn't want to be no alcoholic, and I raised my hand that night, and I don't remember too much that was said in there except that one of the guys leaned over across the table when the meeting was over, and he said, "I don't know why you came here tonight, but he says, I want to tell you why I came." He said, "I came here because I was sick and tired of being sick and tired." He said, "That's why I came here, Mack." And I don't know, it just filled me up, you know, because I'd lived that up there in that room. That maybe that was the end of the drunk or whatever. It was just that I got sick and tired of being sick and tired. I really identified with that. And on the way back to our room on Anaheim Street, this guy that brought me apologized. He said that wasn't a very big meeting. If you don't drink anything tonight or tomorrow, I'll come and get you and take you to a big meeting. So there'll be about 20 people. And back then, that's a good-sized meeting, you know. And he took me to Long Beach. We went down an alley behind a Goodwill store on Pacific Coast Highway in Long Beach. And back there in the alley was a meeting. And that was my introduction into Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I really wasn't impressed. You know. I'll tell you something. The guys in the Union Hall over in Wilmington were impressed with me. They were so impressed with me that they let me make coffee for them for the next 3.5 years. And that became my home group, and I made coffee for the meeting. And now I'll tell you the only thing I know for sure. I had a cup of coffee. You got good coffee here. They got people making coffee, and some of these meetings should not be allowed to make coffee. And that's about the only thing I know for sure, but I compliment the coffee maker. You're good coffee. I grew up in the little town of Wilmington, or I lived there as a kid. I ended up on Skid Row in the town I grew up in, and I didn't even know it was Skid Row. Seriously, basically what happened to me. I went to San Francisco when I was 16, went to maritime school in the early 40s. I went with a group of guys from the harbor area, and we all went to sea together. We drank together, we had fun together, and after the war was over, we all ended up working in the maritime industry in the L.A. harbor. And we had a favorite watering hole down on Anaheim Street, a little place on Neptune and Anaheim Street in Wilmington, a place called Crisis. Now, I thought nothing of the name of that bar for years until I came to AA, and then I said it one day, and I thought, what a hell of a name for a bar, you know. But I'll tell you about that bar. It opened at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we were usually out there. That harbor area come alive about 5 o'clock in the morning. We'd be sitting out there in their car about 10 minutes to 6, and if that bartender was 5 minutes late opening that place up, we got right on his case, you know. And we were a tight-clicked group of guys. There was a deep-sea diving school just a couple of blocks away, the only one in the world at that time. So you had some pretty rough characters come in from all over the world to get into that diving school and make those big bucks. So us homeboys there, we sort of stuck together in the crisis. And if somebody got a 502 and went to jail, we bailed them out. Some guy goes to the track, loses money. We give him enough to feed the old lady for the week and keep her off his back, and we just stuck pretty close together. There was a guy in that group named Jerry, and I'd been to sea with Jerry as a kid. I drank with him. I'd been to school with him before we went up north. And, Jerry was a journeyman drinker. Yeah, I mean by that he drank up 2 or 3 wives by the time he's 30 years old. And he was a hell of a good bartender and a good drinker and good guy. And one day he disappeared out of this group. He just never ever came back again. And one day a guy came in the bar and we're all in there, and this guy called us down the end of the bar. In a low voice, like Jerry died, he said, "Did you guys hear what happened to Jerry?" We said no, and this guy said he went to Alcoholics Anonymous. He said in a low voice like he died, you know. And after that, around that bar, when we mentioned his name, we talked in a low voice like he died, you know. And so that's all I knew about AA. I had a friend, he went there and he died, you know. And but I remember as a young man drinking all over the world. Alcohol was a problem to me. It was an answer to a lot of my problems. I can remember seeing people laying passed out across the end of a bar, and I'd say to myself, you know, if I couldn't hold my whiskey better than that, I'd quit. Yeah, that'll never happen to me. I can remember doing that when I can remember people coming to me when I was very young and tell me, you know, if you don't slow down, you're going to lose that wife and those kids and that home out in Torrance that you worked hard for. You're going to lose that kid if you don't slow down. And you know, I didn't know how to slow down. I'd drink and I'd take a drink and drink and take a drink, and then away we'd go. And it just didn't seem that important. I drank up my first wife, some kids, in a house out in Torrance by the time I was 25 years old. I had another wife in another house in Torrance by the time I was 30, and I drank that up. I was a young man around the waterfront that would do anything for the approval of other men. And I did, and I got the approval of a lot of men. And I wanted to become president of one of those unions, and I became president of one. When I was 29 years old, I got elected president of Local 20 of the International Longshoremen Warehousemen Union. And I got that job because of what I would do, not what I knew. And I drank that up before I got here. You know? Same guys that sat in that office with me the night I put my feet up on that desk and I got elected. I thought, boy, you know, I'm only 29 years old. Old Harry Bridges running the International there, and I thought, he better look out because I'll give his job next, you know. And with alcohol, about 3 years later, the same guys that sat in that room with me and drank whiskey went up to San Francisco and had Harry Bridges take my job away from me. I used to stand at this podium when I was new, and I'd say, and those guys drank out of the same jug with me for 20 years, and then they'd help strip me of my job I worked for all my life. I was angry. One day in a coffee shop after a meeting like this, one of the old-timers set me down and said, I want to tell you something, kid. Heard you mouthing off again the night that we stripped you of your job. I said, we didn't take your job, Mack, because you drank. I said, we took your job because you don't take care of business when you drink. I said, if you could have showed up at the office 1 hour a day, that's all you had to do. Just show up once in a while. You'd have still had your job. But he said, you let your lousy drinking get you to a point that you couldn't give us 1 hour a day of your time. I didn't know that when I got here. I did not know that alcohol had probably saved my life. You know. And alcohol surrendered me. It beat all that pride out of me and all that ego out of me to a point that I became willing to go with a total stranger anywhere to get relief from the way I was living. Alcohol took a lot of things from me, but it gave me some things. You know, I was at a meeting in my home group, the 502 Club in Covina, not too long ago, and I said something at this stag meeting, and a young man, as we were leaving, he came over and he said, Mack, I think you've been sober so long that you forgot what it was like to drink and have fun. And I looked at him for a minute, and I thought, and I just asked him, I said, you know, anybody ever kick you sober? You know, I said, if I had just a little bit more fun out there, I'd have been dead, you know. And that's true, and alcohol did all that, and yet I couldn't remember that when I got here. I used to like to drink on Signal Hill in Long Beach. Nice little town, a good drinking town. You could go up there and you could drink all you want to, and you could do anything you wanted to. And if you didn't kill anybody, you paid your way out the next morning and went home and forgot about it. Good drinking. And I had a guy almost beat me to death in a parking lot up there a couple of years before I got to the program. Kicked this cheekbone here right to the roof of my mouth, broke my nose, and almost stomped me to death. And he kicked me sober. You know? I'm laying there on the ground, and I could hear the sirens coming and people screaming, and I'm choking on my own blood. And I'm thinking, if they don't get here pretty soon, this guy will kill me. And you know, the funny or the sad part of it, either way you look at it, 3 days later, I'm sitting in a gin mill with some of my friends, and I'm drinking. I got a head that looked like a watermelon, you know? And we're laughing about it. We're laughing about that was me out there in that parking lot, you know. That was me that guy almost kicked to death. And I'm sitting around a gin mill laughing about it. You know, one more drink, one more lousy drink, and most of us could have missed this whole thing. You know? And I know it was true in my case. You know? I walked out of a divorce court in Long Beach, California when I was 25 years old. I saw my wife and my kids leave that courtroom that day with another man. And I know as well as I'm standing here today, without some type of chemical to put into my system that day to take away the anger, and the hate, and the guilt, and the feeling, and everything, I would have destroyed people there that day, or possibly myself. But I used alcohol, and it took away all that stuff and let me live with me one more day. I stepped out of a place on Anaheim Street a few years later one day, and I've been drinking. I know nobody in the room ever did this, but I went in that bar about 7 or 8 in the morning, and I'm coming out about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sun's going down, that same beautiful sun I saw today. Only when I came out of that bar, I couldn't see anything, so I'm just standing there on the curb trying to get my eyes focused. And when they did, there's a stop sign there, and a car pulled up, and that car used to be my car. And there was a guy driving it, and there was a lady sitting next to him. It used to be my wife. And as that car pulled away that day, 2 kids waved to me from the back seat. And I know as well as I'm standing here today, without something to take away those guilt and those feelings that day, I would have destroyed myself. I used alcohol. Alcohol did for me what it was supposed to do for a long time. I had no quarrels with it. I don't want to be an alcoholic when I came here. I couldn't picture living out there in that world without alcohol. I'm 36 years old when the guy brought me here. And I sat in these meetings, and I always sat in the back when I was new, and I heard some strange things from these podiums, you know. I heard a guy stand up here like I am tonight. He said, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and I only drink beer. And I remember I almost fell out of my chair. I thought, hell, I drank beer when I wasn't drinking, you know. And I don't mean to offend the beer drinkers. It's just the way it was with me, you know. And, I heard another guy say he came because he got a 502, and I thought, well, why would he come here if he still had a car, you know? I wouldn't have came if I had a car, you know. I heard another guy say that he only drank good whiskey. And, you know, I got to thinking most everything I ever drank was pretty good. And I drank some pretty raunchy stuff, you know. I drank some stuff down the Marshall Gilbert Islands one time, made in a 55-gallon drum out under a palm tree. And I don't know what they made it out of. coconuts and jet fuel or whatever, airplane gas, I guess. I don't know, but that's the raunchiest stuff I ever tasted in my life. And I'll tell you how bad it was. On the third day that you drank this stuff, the mosquitoes quit biting you. That's the truth. That crap come right out through the pores of your skin. They just light and fly on, you know. And you know, it was good. And I didn't know why it was good until I got here to AA. It was good because it was all there was. And that makes a big difference. You know? I heard another guy say, and this is funny, I don't know where the newcomers sat today, but when I was new, we always sat in the back. You hear better back there. It's different anyway. You know? I heard a guy stand up here at the podium, and he says, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous to get my wife back. And I could have swore that guy, I was sitting in the back, I thought he said you had to get your wife back. I'll never forget that. I sat through that whole meeting trying to figure out which one of mine would have me back, you know. So, I'll tell you right now, if you're new or you're fairly new here in the room, you don't get here with all the answers. And the highest anybody in these rooms get is sober. That's as high as any of us ever get. So if you're sober here tonight, you're right along with everybody else. I was introduced to a group of guys on the waterfront that believed in that big book. They believed in the 12 steps, and they believed in strong sponsorship. They didn't tell you did, or ask you to do something. They said, this is what you're going to do. You know? And if you, they'd come to get me to take me to a meeting, and if I asked them where we was going, they'd yell at me, you know. Yeah, you just get in the car, you know, just get in the car. And thank God for them. I look back on them today. You know, I was sitting in a meeting, and we were having fun with the reading here tonight. But I'm nobody's fool. I can listen when I want to, and I heard them reading out of this book all the time, and I thought if they read it every week, it must be important, you know. So I'm listening, and it said that these are only suggested steps, and these guys are always after me, and what step you were. So another newcomer leaned over to me one day, and he said, do you hear that? He said, these are only suggested steps, we don't have to do it. And one of the old timers said, yeah, but it's like a cop suggesting you get in the car, you know. And he livened us up, you know, and just, I hear guys say, oh, I drank too much, and everybody go like that. My sponsor would say, people who drank too much die. That's what happens to people who drink too much. It says some people drink just enough, get just sick enough, and lose enough things that they get here and they can stay. This is a program for desperate people. I believe it. I don't believe if you got it all going for you that you come in here. I don't believe that you can come in and stay if you got it all going for you. I think this is a program for desperate people. And I think it was given to two desperate men to pass down to us, and I believe that. You know? I got in the inventory, and I got a chance to look at Mack and look at this guy I'd been living with. You know? First time in my life I got to know a little bit about this guy I've been drinking with and living. I tell you what I discovered, I got damn near killed a pretty good guy. You know? I really did. And today, whatever I am today, I'm the best Mack I've ever been. You know? And I know that. And it's not important anybody else knows. It's important that I know it. I'm the best Mack I've ever been today. You know? And it's a direct result of those guys. And because left on my own, I would have wandered away. I see it. I see it constantly. There's a passing parade through here of people who just come in and wander away. But these guys hung on to me, and they got me. And I'll tell you what I discovered. I knew a lot of this before, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. I was born in Texas. And when I was 3 years old, my father got killed. And they shipped me off to Arkansas to live on a farm with my grandmother. A little place called Sunshine, Arkansas. Yeah. That ain't the end of the world, but you can see it from there. You know, right over the hill. And I don't mean to offend any people or make fun of anybody's religion or anything, neither. This is just what happened to me. My grandmother was a Southern Baptist, you know, And she lived on a little farm. What she raised was rocks. She had about 90 acres of them. You know? I don't really think it was meant to be that way. It's just the way it turned out, you know. But about a half a mile from her rock farm was a Baptist church, and her and I used to walk down there 2 or 3 times a week. And I'm 7 or 8 years old. That's as far back as I can remember anything. And I can remember walking to church with my grandmother, hot July, August back there, and these people ride by in their car, and they'd wave to us. And then we'd sit in the front row, and they'd tell us how much they loved us. And then we'd walk home, and they'd ride by and wave to us. Now, that's what I saw. I know there's more to it than that, but that's what I saw. You know? I compared my insides with the way they said they felt, and I was different. They told us that they loved us. I didn't feel they loved us. My grandmother told me she loved me every day. I felt unloved all my life. You know? I thought my mother brought me out there and dumped me and left me. Yeah. Just the way it went. Feelings I started. You know, back there in Arkansas, they call it a creek. Out here, we call it a river, a stream, I guess. But there was one ran by my grandmother's rock farm, and they used to bring these Baptists down there in the summertime and dunk them, you know. And I'm about 8 years old, and I go sit on the bank, and I watch them dunk those Baptists, and they didn't look any different after they dunked them than they did. And the whole damn thing was a mystery to me, you know. And about 100 yards or so up this little old creek was a red clay bank, and I used to go up there and kick big chunks of clay off in the creek and muddy up the water, so they dunk those Baptists in muddy water, you know. And I haven't had a drink yet. You know? And I was sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous when I was new. A guy got up here like I am, and I'll never forget it. He started telling about getting his wife and his kids back. And this guy started crying. Big tears rolled out of his eyes. And I've seen men cry since then. God, I sort of love it. But that day, I said in that meeting, I could not remember ever crying a day in my life that day. When I got into the inventory and I started digging around, I found out I used to cry a lot when I was a kid, mostly about animals. I love animals. I was watching a thing on TV not too long ago on the pay channel, and they were killing elephants, and I had to turn the damn thing off. I messed up my whole day. People, it don't bother me. Animals do, you know. That's just the way it is. And I lived on a farm where they had a slaughterhouse, and they killed a lot of animals, and when they'd kill them, I'd run off. I'd go off and hide. They'd have to send somebody to find me and bring me back, and I'm 8 or 9 years old. And the last time I cried, maybe I was 10, over a goat. Somebody brought a goat out there and gave it to me, and I thought it was mine. Anyway, on the 4th of July, they barbecued that goat, you know, and I ran off, and they couldn't find me for almost all day. And finally, one of my uncles got me and brought me back, and he was sort of my hero. He was about 18 or 19. And what he told me was, I don't think the word suppressed was even in his vocabulary, you know. I think he told me, kid, if you're ever going to grow up, you're going to amount to anything, you're going to be a man, you got to stuff those damn feelings. You got to learn how to stuff those feelings. And he taught me how. In a slaughterhouse where they hang the beef after they kill it, they have a big trough where the blood all runs into a tank. And I go stand by these blood troughs when I was a kid just to show people I could do it and not cry. Yeah. And then I found out I could do it with people. You know. I never ever cried again because my mother didn't come to see me. Now, I started stuffing feelings when I was 7 or 8 years old. I lived on that farm for until I was about 10 or 11. I'm not sure exactly how old I was, but my mother remarried again, and she moved into a little town, a very popular little town now called Hot Springs, Arkansas. We got our homeboy up in the White House up there, you know. He came up from Hope, but he's really, you know. But I got to introduce to a stepfather. First image of a man that I got, and I'll tell you what it was. He's bigger than I am, way bigger than I am, and he's a big redneck. He drank whiskey, he drove a pickup truck, he built bridges, and he liked to fight. And he took me out on the job with him. You know, and I'd sit out on the job, fish off those rivers or those bridges in the Ozarks, and on Saturday these guys would work a half a day, and then they'd stand in the middle of the bridge and they'd drink whiskey. And I'm standing there one day, I told you about the last one, this is the first one. And I'm standing there with the old man one day, and the jug came by, and he took a big gulp, and he handed it to me, and I took one, I gave it to the next one. That's the first drink of alcohol I ever had. And I don't remember any special taste or feeling or anything I got from them. Never even knew when it was until I got into the image. But I found out what I got from it. I'll tell you what I got from that first drink. I got a nod of approval from other men for the first time in my life. I did a lot of things, but nobody ever gave me any approval. But I got a nod of approval. I took that jug and gave it to the next guy, and every guy there gave me that nod of approval. First time in my life I felt like a man, and I got it with a drink in my hand. You know, that's when I felt so lousy, when I sat in the back of these rooms when I was new. These people are talking about not drinking one day at a time, but I know they mean longer than that. You know, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to go out in that world and function as a man and not drink. You know, and I got it from my first drink. They have a racetrack in Hot Springs in Arkansas, and it's called Oaklawn Park, and they have the Arkansas Derby there, and then the winner usually goes on and runs in the Kentucky Derby. It's a big thing there. And I got introduced to, I'd been in town 2 or 3 days, and a kid took me down to the Rock Island Depot. They had 2 trains coming in this town, none going out. Everything stopped right there, you know. And they bring in these special trains from Memphis and St. Louis and Dallas and Chicago during the racing season. And this kid told me if those people go home with their money, they don't feel like they had a good time. You know? So we'd get magnolia blossoms off of some trees, and we'd run aboard the train down the Rock Island, Missouri Pacific, find some southern lady, hand her a magnolia blossom, grab her luggage, carry it out to the car, and hold your head, hustling. You know? We'd hustle those depots, and then I went out behind the racetrack. They had a table set up out there, and they had a nickel, dime, and a quarter bookie. I learned how to read a racing form when I was 10 years old. You know? I thought everybody lived that way. You know? I really did. We'd sit in school and hear the horses running around the track in the afternoon, you know, and the crowds cheering and the kids talking about who won the daily double, you know. And I thought everybody lived like that. And I thought it was great. I saw real men out that racetrack. You go out there and every day you'd see them. And usually what I thought a real man was a guy with a nice suit, had a drink in his hand, a nice looking lady on his arm, a handful of money, and a smile on his face. And it beat anything I ever saw at that Baptist church. You know? There you go. And I came to California when I was 14, moved to San Pedro. I hustled the docks the same way. I found out, and I loved it. I go down to Union Hall and make a run for those guys, pick up some pinochle cards for them, whatever, and make more money in one afternoon than I could in that rock farm in 6 months, and I loved it. And I remember being in school when I was 16, and I'm looking out the window every day thinking, God, it's going to be over before I get out there, you know. So I took off, and I used to say I ran away from home to go to sea, but I ran away from home because of authority. I couldn't stand authority. I had a problem with it all my life. I ended up in the Marine Corps for a while. And that's a hell of a place to end up if you got a problem with authority, you know. It really is. And but I went to sea, and alcohol wasn't a problem with me, you know. It was the answer to my problem. And I did what everybody did. I drank and I had fun, and I drank all over the world. I drank in some of the finer spots, you know, like Shanghai Reds on Beacon Street in San Pedro, or maybe a joint on Bourbon Street, or something in Galveston, Texas, or up in San Francisco in Embarcadero. Every city had one, and I loved it. And I drank all over the world, and alcohol was not a problem to me. It was the answer. After World War II was over and all the money was gone, I ended up working around the maritime industry. became known as a young man that would do anything anybody wanted him to do for approval. I used to go up to San Francisco. I used to go up to Seattle. I went to the World Convention in Seattle in 1990. I went down on the docks and sat and drank coffee and looked at a couple of joints that I used to hang around when I was a kid. I used to go up there and get on non-union ships, and I'd bring them south, and I'd sabotage gear and equipment aboard these ships, and I got people hurt, possibly killed. I don't know. I just did what I was paid to do. And I wanted to be president of one of those unions, and I got elected president because of what I would do. I met a little girl from Torrance, California, and I got married, bought a house, and a couple of kids, and I drank those up. Got another wife. I was going to replace that one. I drank that up. And I ended up living in a flop house in a town that I grew up in. And everything's gone. I used to walk down the street and I'd see somebody coming, and I'd cross over the other side of Avalon Boulevard because I couldn't remember what lie I told the person the last time I saw him. Somebody'd stop and offer me a ride, and I'd say, no, I'm just going down to get my car out of the shop. You know? They knew I didn't have a car. The worst part was I knew that they knew. You know, that was the worst. And yet I didn't know I was an alcoholic. I wouldn't raise my hand. I don't want to be an alcoholic. It takes what it takes, you know, and I believe that. I believe this program's for desperate people. But I went to work on right after World War II, they put some gambling ships. They anchored them 3 miles off the coast. They put the Lux off Long Beach and the Rex off Redondo Beach, and they put up water taxis, and they opened up Las Vegas 3 miles off the coast. And they didn't have any gamblers for the Lux, so they sent to Hot Springs, Arkansas, where they did illegal gambling and brought the gamblers out to man the Lux. And through some of the people I knew, and I went to work aboard the Lux. And I was one of the last guys off of it when the Coast Guard towed it in. And I made more money than I ever dreamed of, drank better whiskey, had more fun, prettier girls, the whole thing. And it wasn't a problem, you know. But it became a problem, you know. It became a problem. And I don't think it became a problem until that day that Danny brought me to AA. So I know one thing for sure. If anybody's sitting here and they're new, if you ain't got some problems, you stick around here a while and go back and drink some more, you'll have some. If anything, I can guarantee you for sure, we'll screw that drinking up. If you got any good drinking left, it'll be screwed up if you stay around here very long. You know? But I stayed around the waterfront for 5 years after I got sober. And they gave me a gang back, but they let me work days. They wouldn't let me work nights. And I unloaded copra ships, one of the worst jobs in the harbor. And I had a gang, and I unloaded copra ships, and had fun, and I went to AA meetings and housing projects and union halls where I met ladies like this. I was still getting in a lot of trouble. Even sober and around there, I had a lot of tracks behind me, and a lot of bridges hadn't been fully burnt, and they were getting in a lot of trouble. So they came to me, some guys came to me one day, and they said, we got a good job for you up in the San Gabriel Valley. And I moved away from the waterfront where I worked most of my life. In 1971, I moved away. I moved up to Covina, West Covina, where I live today. And when I left the waterfront, they said, now, you get up there and you find a coffee maker's job, and because you make good coffee. And I went over to 502 Club when I moved over to West Covina, and I found a coffee maker's job at the Thursday night men's stag, and that's been my home group ever since. And I went to work for a large foods company up in the city of industry, and they were having a lot of trouble with the Teamsters Union. And they'd been wildcat strikes and stuff. They had never had any peace since the Teamsters had organized them. So I went to work for the company. I'd sit down across the table with the Teamsters, and I negotiated their contracts for them for the next 7 years. And they were good contracts. Over in Covina, we had a big 2-story house that we called Crossroads. And it was supported by AA people like this in this room, and was a place where you could go find somebody sleeping in the weeds or at the end of some freeway. If he'd be alcoholic, you could bring him over there and get him some help without any insurance. It was supported by AA people and love of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I took some guys out of that 12-step house. I put them to work for this company that I worked for. And some of them, for the first time in their life, good job with benefits and stuff. And I just recently had a guy call me. And he said, I just retired, Mac. And I want to call you up and thank you. I haven't seen you for years. But he said, I just want to thank you for getting me that job over there. And I thought, well, son of a gun. You know, I worked for 7 years for them, and they fired me, you know. And Eastern Outfit bought that company out, and they came out and just wiped everybody out in one day. And I'll never forget that. Me and my boss is sitting in his office, and we're drinking coffee, and they came in and they just fired us both. And my boss looked at me that day, and his name was Chuck, and he said, God, Mac, I've never been fired before. And I said, God, I have. It really ain't a big deal, you know. And I cleaned my office out that day, and I went out and I had my nameplate on the wall where I parked my car. I went out there and took that off, threw it all in the back, and carried some books out. And then I spent about 2.5 hours going through that company. I hugged people hugged me, I cried, some of them cried. Some of the people love me. I love some of them, still do. I still see them, some of them once in a while. But I left there, and that was the first time in my life I ever left someplace where I wasn't wanted, that I didn't tear it up. You know? I left it the way you taught me in Alcoholics Anonymous to leave anything better than you when I found it, you know. And I went over to the 502 Club that afternoon, and I sat down and I got a cup of coffee, and some friends of mine came in. And they said, what are you doing here this time of day? And I said, God, I just got fired. And there's one guy said, God, that's great, Mac. He says, what do you want to do that you never had guts enough to quit a good job and go do? What do you want to do? And I said, I didn't know, and I really didn't that day. But I went with these guys, and I got an opportunity through this program and through the grace of the loving God that I found here to go back to school and do some things that I wanted to do. I went back to school and I got a license. I retired 3 years ago after a heart attack in my mortgage business. I was in the mortgage banking business. And I retired, and I had a heart attack. I was mowing my front yard 3 years ago, and I knew what it was. And that thing hit, and I'm crawling, trying to get in the house. And I'll tell you something what this program's given me. I can remember like it was yesterday. And my only thoughts was to get in there and get to the phone and get myself some help. But my real feeling was that I don't have time for this crap, you know. I just don't have time for this, God damn it, you know. And anyway, I thank God for medicine today, and I retired a short while later, and I have to tell you something else. About 18 years ago, I went in the clubhouse one day up there, and there was an Al-Anon. I like it when you ask for the Al-Anon. I met a red-headed Irish gal. Her name's Kay, and she's just Irish as hell. And I met her, and I fell in love with her, and I married her. And I was frightened to death when I met her. And some of you might have heard Kate. She spoke with her, and I got to speak at the convention here in Santa Barbara earlier in the year, and she spoke right behind me. But she's a good member of Al-Anon. And in our group down in Covina, we're very tight with our Al-Anon. We always ask if there are any Al-Anons there too. And the reason we do it because we want to find out where they're at. Because if they're all grouped together, when they raise their hand, they're up to something. You know? But I met this red-headed Irish lady, and I fell in love with her, and I was panicked. I thought I'd cleaned all that garbage up in my inventory when I first got sober, but I found that it all creeped back at me. And I went to my sponsor and sat down with him over a cup of coffee, and he's a good Irishman too. And I went to Eddie and I said, I met Kay and told her all about it. And I got a package deal though too, and that was where some of my fear was. There's a little 3-year-old girl involved in it. And every time I'd look at that little 3-year-old girl, I'd see that 16-year-old girl beating on that door, and I would flash back to what a really lousy father I am. I don't know how to be a father. I don't even know how to be a husband. And I'd sit down with Ed and I'd talk to him about Kay and about those feelings. I dumped it all on him. Because I was told when I came here that you're sick as you are secret, I didn't understand that for a long time. I understand that today. When I start hiding anything, I better look out. If I can do it, and they say that, you can do anything you want to do here. It might not get you drunk. But if you defend the right to do it, it'll get you drunk. I believe that. I do. But I sat down with Eddie and I told him about Kay and I told him about this little girl. And he said, we've had you around here, I forget what it was, 8 or 9 years. And he said, we taught you how to treat people. And he said, I've seen you in a meeting when a newcomer spills their coffee. I've seen you go clean it up and get them another cup of coffee. He said, you take Kay home with you. Take that little girl and you treat them like you would a newcomer in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, you won't have any problem. Kay and I live up on the side of the hill in West Covina. When I left this afternoon, I had to get started a little late because that little girl that was 3 is 21 now, and she was out in my car and didn't bring it back. But I live up on the side of a hill up there, and I almost died. That little girl broke my heart. Broke her mother's heart too, I thought because she'd been raised in a home where there was none of that violence, none of that drinking, none of that stuff going on, that she'd get to skate through life. It's tough growing up out there as a youngster today. They'll never be coming in here with 22, 23 years of using out there. That junk will kill them in a week out there. I watched that young girl get involved in drugs when she was 15, 16. I saw her mother put her out of our home when she was 16 because she wouldn't quit using drugs in our home, drank it. We'd go to a roundup or we'd go to a convention, we'd come home, the phone would be ringing. Be some hospital, they found her dropped off somewhere. And 2 years, a little over 2 years ago, she came to the house one day and she said, I need to get a dress. I said, I'm going to a funeral today. One of her girlfriends had drove a car into a freeway going to Palm Springs 100 miles an hour and killed herself. And so she came to borrow one of her mother's dress to go to this funeral. When it was over, she came back. And she came back in and she sat down, and maybe it was a morning like the day that I sat beside that building. She told me, she said, if you'll let me come back home, I won't use drugs in your house anymore, and I won't drink anymore. And me and another guy had started a meeting about 12 years ago on a Monday night. She says, I'll go to your Monday night meeting with you if you'll let me live here again. And I let her move back in, and she started going to meetings with me. And I just got to give her a 2-year birthday cake here recently. She's the treasurer of that Monday night meeting now, But she still pays a price, a hell of a price. About 3 weeks ago in the meeting, she had a convulsion right in the middle of the meeting. Hadn't had one in a year. She thought she was over. One came up. Price she paid. If you're new or you're fairly new around here, and something I've said may help you or it may not, I don't know, but I want to tell you something for sure. If I was sitting in this meeting tonight and I was sitting back there in the back where I was sitting when I was new, somebody is up here talking the way I've been talking, I would probably say to myself, it's all right for you, Mack. How about me? When did I get mine? Because I was always looking for mine. And I'll tell you something, if you're sitting here tonight and you're sober, you probably already got yours. Because there'll be people die right around here in this weekend. And they'll die from the disease of alcoholism. And they'll never know that this room is here. Never know that this room is here. You know, I heard a guy say when I was new one day, he said, told a newcomer, he says, hang on to your seat because this is going to be a hell of a trip. And my sponsor at that time came over and he said, Mack, the trip you're going to take here in Alcoholics Anonymous is about that far. That's the trip you're going to take. It's from your head to your heart. That's what the trip is here. And he says, those steps are the thing that'll take you there. That big book says, Our Dilemma's a Lack of Power. And then it also says in there, the sole purpose of this book is to help you find power greater than yourself. And it says down there that having had a spiritual awakening as a result of working these steps, the answers are here for people like us. You know? And I was very frightened when I first got here because they kept praying and talking about God, and I was sitting in the back and I'd think, you know, if I got to believe in God, this thing ain't going to work for me. And an old timer told me, he says, you know, some of us come and then we come to believe, Mack, you know. And he says the most spiritual that some of us will ever be is just teachable. You know? I believe that. I believe for people like us to just be here in this room and be teachable, maybe as spiritual as we ever get. I'm very glad to be up here tonight. I'm glad I came up. I'm glad that Ann's here and looking so good. You look like the Commodore or something.
Yeah, I'm the Commodore.
Yeah. Brings back a lot of old memories. And, you know, I said I got to come up here, and I wouldn't have felt right if I hadn't have came neither. Because the guy at that first meeting that he took me to on Broad Street quite a few years ago told me on the way home, he said, I was saying, well, what's the scoop here? And he says, nothing, except if you find anything here and you don't give it away, you'll lose it. That's why I came up here tonight, because I like the way I live. I like the things that are going on in my life, you know. And I like being sober. I've been to meetings all over the world in the last few years. I got to take Kate home to Ireland a couple of years ago, and I went to meetings all over Ireland, all over Europe, London, and I've been all over Canada. We spent a month on an island off Nova Scotia in Canada last year, and I went to AA meetings up there. And you know something? No matter where I've been, I find the same blanket of love that I found when I walked in this room here tonight, anywhere in the world. You know? This is one fantastic program for desperate people. Thank you very much.